And I want to introduce myself if you don't know me. My name is Skipper Chenault, and I'm a Corinthian board member and have done a bunch of sailing. And tonight I'm going to talk with you about the rules of the road. My background in this is that I was in the Navy for 11 years on active duty in submarines, so I used the rules of the road there as a seaman going to sea. After that, I became a maritime lawyer that dealt with ship collisions. So then I became, I read a whole lot of legal cases that involved the rules of the road for ship collisions. And over the years of watching people make mistakes, I got to see a lot of things which made me understand how the rules work a lot better than I ever did when I was going to sea. A lot of people that go to sea on merchant ships know, in my mind, the rules a lot better than people like me who are on Navy ships. Thank you, Albert. But then as a lawyer, I had to be a lot more familiar with the rules because I was handling cases involving them. All right, so the objectives of tonight's discussion, and please, if you have any questions, either here in the room or on Zoom, ask them as we go. It's to familiarize you with the important concepts of the steering and sailing rules that are common to both the international rules, the COLREGs, and the U.S. inland rules. And then I want to identify areas that we're not going to talk about tonight, which include sound signals, lights, shape, and distress signals. There's just not enough time to go through that, and we're going to have to go through this pretty quickly to go through all of the things. For those of you watching by Zoom, I've got a picture of the rules of the road book. I'm holding one up here in the yacht club. Merchant ships are required to have these on board. Navy ships do. This is the rules of the road. This is published by the Coast Guard through independent publishers. But what it does, it's really good, is it has the international rule on one page and the corresponding inland rule on the other page. Most people can't memorize all of these rules, so it's good to have this on your chart table or someplace where you can readily get to it, especially for looking up lights at night. To me, that's probably the most difficult thing about the navigation rules is recognizing strange light configurations on vessels that you might come across at night, and that is a handy way to find that. So it's important that you understand the purpose of the rules. The purpose of the rules is to prevent collisions. The rules are to enable vessels to avoid a close quarters situation, which means being dangerously close together, and pass at a safe distance. That's the objective of the rules. Avoid a close quarters situation and pass at a safe distance. So that's what we want to do when we're out there on the water. Now I want to make a big distinction between the racing rules for sailing and the navigation rules that we're talking about tonight. The whole purpose of the navigation rules we're talking about tonight is, as I said, to pass at a safe distance. The racing rules are to let one boat maintain an advantage over another one, depending upon a set of rules that have been set out. So just like in the COLREGs, the starboard tack sailboat has the right of way over a port tack sailboat. Passing at a safe distance under the COLREGs is not having the guy on the bow telling the helmsman, come on, down, okay, that's good, you're 2 feet away, 3 feet away, good. Boom, we come back up close hauled as we dip the stern of some starboard tack boat. That you can do in the racing rules. That's how they're set up. The COLREGs, if you did that, you've had a near miss, and a lot of companies would require you then to fill out a near miss report, do an investigation, and try and figure out why you allowed 2 vessels in the ocean to get that close together. But for sailing, we're doing things because we're racing the boats. So there's a completely different framework of what's going on with these two things. There are legal cases out there about collisions that happen on the race course. And what the courts have decided is that when you are racing, you have contractually agreed with the race committee and the other people racing for the purposes of that race to be bound by the racing rules of sailing, but not the coal regs. But if you're out on the water and there's other boats that are out there that aren't racing, they're the ones who are going to be using the collision rules, not the racing rules. So you have to keep that in mind. On some offshore races, the racing rules might be used during daylight hours, and then all the vessels go to the coal regs during nighttime sailing. Or maybe distance from the start and then distance from the finish line. It would be put in the sailing instructions for the race so that you would know which rules you should be following. And a lot of times, tonight I'm going to say coal regs, which is the short name for the international rules for preventing collisions at sea. But when I say that, I'm also talking about the inland rules. Now, another thing that I want to make clear is that there are certain terms that we don't use anymore. There's no such thing anymore as a privileged vessel, a burdened vessel, or a right-of-way vessel, except in some limited circumstance which will never come up probably with us. The international rules did away with those terms when they were put into effect in the early 70s to make it clear to people who are watchstanders on vessels that there's a mutual obligation. No vessel is privileged over the other one. No vessel has the right of way. Each vessel is supposed to do what its requirement is under the rules. For some vessels, that's going to be maintain course and speed. The other vessel is going to maneuver in a set way to avoid the vessel whose job is to maintain course and speed. But under the coal regs and the inland rules which correspond to it, if the vessel that's supposed to maintain course and speed decides that the person who's supposed to change course isn't doing so, they have the option of changing course and speed, and if it gets close enough, they're required to change course and speed to avoid collision. Under the old rules, you almost had to have the collision to get to the point where what we now call the stand-on vessel could change course. But the way that we have it now, and you need to keep this in mind, is there is no right-of-way vessel, there is no privileged vessel, and there's no burdened vessel. It's a mutual obligation of the vessels to follow the script that's set out in here to avoid collision. Any questions about that? And then I have a note down here at the bottom. Under the rules, sole fault collisions are extremely rare. And that's because this is a mutual obligation to do these things on the parts of both vessels. So if a collision does happen, it's probably because each vessel bears some proportion of fault. Worldwide, maritime countries follow the coal regs, the international rules. To avoid confusion, when a vessel comes from sea into port, all of the different countries are supposed to make their own internal navigation rules to be similar to the coal regs. It took us into the 1980s in America to come up with what we now have are the inland navigation rules, which are in here along with the coal regs, and they closely follow the coal regs. A lot of the rules are identical. A lot of rules have small changes in them that account for operating in rivers that have current and different things like that. In the international rules, there's a thing called a vessel constrained by draft. That would be like a super tanker with a 60 or 70 foot draft coming into some port. That doesn't exist in the inland rules. There are a few other changes, but almost everything we're going to talk about tonight is the same in both sets of rules. But really the emphasis is on the inland rules. Where do the international rules apply and where do the inland rules apply? Well, there's a line on charts. Once upon a time, you could get printed charts, which are going away, but there's something called a line of demarcation. And it's printed on all of the charts, and it shows where you go from inland rules to the coal regs. Those probably are going to show up on the electronic charts that you have on your chart plotter, but I don't know for certain. So that's something to be aware of. And usually with a line where the coal regs apply, it's 3 nautical miles from land. So if you can find how far out you are from land, when you're 3 miles out, it's the coal regs. If you're closer to land, it's the inland rules. And then when you have entrances to bays, basically what happens is they draw a line between the coal reg side so that there's an artificial crossover point. But that's all shown on the printed charts. And I don't have enough experience with different electronic charts to say exactly where it shows up on there. So our focus tonight is going to be on the steering and sailing rules that cover the actions to avoid collisions. And the steering and sailing rules, this whole book with the rules is broken up into different sections. And the steering and sailing rules are in 3 sections. The first one is all the rules that apply in any condition of visibility. Then we have rules for vessels that are visually in sight of each other. And then there's Rule 19, which is the rule for vessels in restricted visibility. So we're going to spend very little time talking about what to do in fog, because we don't get that much of it down here. And the focus is going to be on the other things. Another important thing is that the rules are written as though there are only 2 boats involved. But you know from your own experience that lots of times there's more than 2 boats. So then what you're going to have to use is good judgment, seamanship, to figure out what the best way is to apply the concepts of what's in the rules to the situation that you have at hand. And one of the best ways to do that is to pick up the radio and call the other vessels and talk to them well in advance to figure out what the problem is. If it's a commercial vessel, it's going to be pretty easy to get that person on the radio, because the guy's sitting up there, or woman, and that's all they have to do. They're on watch and they listen on the radio and are happy to talk, especially if it means that they're not going to run into somebody. If you see in the middle of the night some high-speed boat coming at you at 40 miles an hour, and you hear music booming, that person may not be listening to channel 16 or 13. So you have to be careful with that. But calling people on the radio is one of the best things to do. So first we're going to talk about all the rules that apply in any condition of visibility. So basically that's lookout rule, the safe speed rule, risk of collision, the general rule for action to avoid collision, and then Rule 9, the narrow channel rule. We're not going to talk about Rule 4, which says what this applies to, and we're not going to talk about traffic separation schemes, which happen in restricted waters. We don't have any of those real close to us. The other rules that we're going to talk about are rules that apply to vessels that are inside of each other. Rule 12 is sailing vessels. Then we're going to have Rule 13, overtaking, which applies to all vessels. Then we're going to have the head-on situation and crossing situation, which are for power-driven vessels. Rule 16 is the action by the giveaway vessel. Rule 17 is the action by the stand-on vessel. And Rule 18, responsibility between vessels, ranks all the different types of vessels in order of who has to give way to who in different circumstances, like a vessel that's trawling, a sailing vessel, a vessel that for some reason can't operate its rudder or its engines. It's called not under command. There's a pecking order of who gives way to who, and that's all set out here in Rule 18. And then Rule 19 is just one rule, conduct of vessels in restricted visibility. So what are my 2 favorite rules? We're going to rules now that always apply. To me, they are the lookout rule and the safe speed rule. And I don't know which one is the more important of the 2 rules. If I had to choose, I would say it's the lookout rule. I've summarized what the language says. At all times, which is 24 hours a day, you must maintain a proper lookout by all available means appropriate to the circumstances. So that means by sight, by hearing, by radar if you have radar, by AIS if you have that, whatever it is that you have, that you can determine whether there's another vessel out there that could get in a collision with you. And that's the purpose of the lookout rule, is to fully appraise the situation and risk of collision. So does this rule mean that you have to use your radar on a bright sunshiny day to find out whether there's some vessel that you can't see? No, it doesn't. But what it does mean is if it's starting to get foggy, or there's a fog bank over the side, it's hazy or something like that, dusk is coming, and you have the radar, yes, use the radar. Turn it on every now and then for sure to look and see if there's something out there. In local waters, you may be so familiar with the waters you don't need the radar as a backup. But as things get crowded, if I was going along the Gulf Coast with all the trawlers that are out there and vessels that are operating in dark, like in the Pensacola race, it might be nice to turn the radar on every 15 minutes if I was unsure of who was around me by the lights. Any questions about the lookout rule? So this Japanese guy who sailed, what was it, 6,000 miles across the Pacific Ocean, single-handed, he said he slept at night. Is he violating the international rules by sleeping and not maintaining a lookout? Yes, he is. So he's assuming the risk of doing that. Maybe he has an AIS alarm that awakes him, or a radar alarm if a vessel gets within a certain distance. That could help him, but somehow he needs to maintain a lookout at all times. The next rule is safe speed. The rules do not define what a safe speed is. It's up to you to decide what a safe speed is for your vessel at any given time. All the rule tells you is that at all times, you must proceed at a safe speed so that you can take proper and effective action to avoid collision and be stopped within a distance appropriate to the prevailing circumstances and conditions. So let's say that you have pea soup fog and you can barely see the bow of your boat. The fog is so heavy. Does that mean you have to stop? Well, that depends. Do you have radar? Do you have AIS? If you have radar, then I think you're very well justified in going ahead in the fog at a slower speed than you would normally go to because you're watching that. If you have AIS, which is, if you're not familiar with it, it's an automatic system where vessels transmit their GPS positions and other data, that you can receive that either on a screen or on a device, but that way you can see where vessels are that otherwise you'd only be able to pick up on radar. An important part about this is, can you be stopped in the distance of the visibility that you can see? There used to be a rule under the old rules that was a common sense rule, and it was called the half distance rule, which, and I think it's still a very good rule, and the rule is you're going too fast if you can't stop your vessel in half the distance that you can see. So if you can see a quarter mile, you have to be able to stop your vessel in an eighth of a mile. Because the reason is because you'll see another vessel come in at a quarter mile, and if you're head on or in any other direction, he's supposed to start stopping or doing something. You're supposed to start doing something, and if you both do what you're supposed to do, then you don't run into each other. So this is a judgment call, and so in fog lookout, you're doing that also by hearing, to hear fog signals from another vessel, to hear engine noises from another vessel, to hear machinery noises from other things. This is all stuff that goes into the safe speed rule. I wonder about the safe speed rule, those times that I've come out of Madisonville through the channel and around the lighthouse, and I am coming out into what still for my boat is kind of a narrow channel, and I see some motorboat coming in going 35 or 40 miles an hour who's headed straight at me. And I wonder, has he had many deers? Does he even see that I'm there because the bow's raised way up out of the water? And it makes me a little bit nervous because I can't get my boat out of the way for someone who's coming that fast. So only he knows whether that's a safe speed for him or not. So these two rules, lookout rule and safe speed, are the most important rules in my mind. This slide has a bunch of things, factors that affect safe speed. I spent some time at the Naval Academy doing some sail training stuff with them last month, and this was a slide they had in a presentation, and I thought it was pretty good, but the more I look at it, the more I don't completely like it. Rule 6 has got all this stuff in it, but things that affect how fast you should go are visibility, the traffic density, how many other boats are there around you, the qualifications of the person on watch, and that I think has to do with it because of reaction time. And do you have an experienced helmsman doing this, or is this someone who is just watching it while you go down and make a sandwich? The maneuverability of your vessel, the background lights. Background lights is a really big thing. If you're coming in from sea at night towards a place that there's lights all over, it's very hard to distinguish other vessel lights from all the lights of the city. The wind, the sea, the current, how deep your vessel is, how deep the other vessels might be, because you might not be able to quickly get out of the way of people. Do you have radar? Are you using it? Yes, then that affects how fast you can go. If you aren't getting a good radar picture, you should slow down. The number of radar contacts, that's like traffic density. If you've got 1,000 people out there, then you're going to want to slow down. That happened one time going into Scotland on the submarine. We, all of a sudden, on the surface, found ourselves probably with 100 green lights around us. They were all trawlers. They were going every different direction like a bunch of rats. And all we could do was slow down and slowly go through all this thing. And that was the only way to do it. We had to keep out of the way of all those trawling vessels, but it was way too deep to anchor and we had a place to go. So we just slowly did this and they sort of parted the way. But that was an example where we had lots of traffic density and so we slowed down. Any questions about safe speed? So we're using safe speed and lookout to help evaluate whether there's risk of collision. And risk of collision, to me, is a really important thing. The best definition that I know of risk of collision is this one from a court case that I've written down, which is the mere chance, peril, hazard, or danger of collision, but not necessarily an immediate danger. The way I like to think of it is you have risk of collision if you have two vessels that are close enough where if one of them doesn't follow the rules, they could run into each other. That's not what the rule says, but that's the way that I interpret it, and that's the way that I think that it should apply. To me, if there's risk of collision, you then become obligated to follow the rules. In the middle of Lake Pontchartrain on a bright sunshiny day, you can blindfold yourself, go as fast as your boat goes, turn it in donuts all day long, and it's not a problem because there's no risk of collision if there are no other boats around. But as soon as you start getting boats in, then there's risk of collision may apply, and then you have to follow the rules of the road to keep from running into the other person. So the way I think of risk of collision in a way is to have a big circle around your boat. This is your safety zone. If another vessel is coming and getting into that safety zone, then that's when risk of collision starts to attach. Because if they're outside of that circle, you're not going to run into each other. But as soon as they come in, then risk of collision starts to attach. So risk of collision increases as the range to the other vessel decreases and speed increases. And so this drawing, I don't know that you can see it very well, it's got a distance out here of 12 miles, 8 miles, 4 miles, and here we have a close quarters situation. This is something that's set up for big ships. A lot of the big ships out there take a mile or more to stop. So the people on those ships are looking out many miles ahead with radar and visually to make sure that they're not going to run into someone. So 12 miles, they're starting to think about what's going on. When a vessel gets within 8 miles, then we really need to pay attention to what we're doing. We've got to talk to that person on the radio.
Wake up the captain.
Wake up. Well, on my ship, the captain said, you cannot allow a vessel to get within 4 miles of us without my permission, without my express permission. So this is how this idea works. On a small boat in Lake Pontchartrain, you can contract that bubble because there's less risk. You know what the other vessels are. You've got a small maneuverable boat, and there's things you can do to take the action to avoid collision. Now, one of the things that to determine whether there is risk of collision is the idea of a vessel approaching on constant bearing decreasing range. And so this is what it would look like on a graph, and that's what it would look like on the radar. The picture on the left, we see this boat crossing in front of the other one. This boat is coming up. Since this is a 90-degree angle, they're both going at the same speed on perpendicular courses. So when this boat first sees this one, the angle's 45 degrees. And it stays at 45 degrees the whole time until they run into each other. So you have constant bearing, the angle stays at 45 degrees, but the other boat's just keeping getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until it's right there.
If the speeds are constant.
Yes, but if you're at a different angular separation, then one could be going faster than the other, and you still get this same effect. On radar, it's the radar return keeps getting closer and closer to you in the center of the screen. It keeps moving straight in at you because the angle stays the same and the range decreases. So this is a slide. This is something the Naval Academy had, and I thought it was good. So this is when you first see the vessel. It's off your starboard bow, and you see it there. Whoops. And then it moves to this position over there. So first you saw it here. A couple of minutes later, it's moved over there. So then it has a right bearing drift. So you're not going to run into each other. There still may be risk of collision, but you don't have the constant bearing decreasing range. Because yes, the thing could be going just like that down your side 50 feet away. That is too close. So this is to illustrate the idea of what a right bearing drift is. Here's another one where we have a vessel that shows up here on the horizon. And then the next time you see it, it's close. But the angle from your boat to the other one is the same. So that tells you you're about to run into that person. So a person who's acting as a lookout should be told that if the angle to the thing stays about the same, and it's going to vary a couple of degrees, that's someone that you could run into. And then if that's an inexperienced person, they should know to tell someone who is an experienced person what to look for. Any questions about this idea? Under the rules, if you have power-driven vessels that are meeting head-on, that by itself defines risk of collision. It doesn't matter whether the range is 5 miles or half a mile. If they're coming head-on each other, there is risk of collision, and we'll talk about that rule later.
Most of shell.
So, after having avoided collisions myself, been Monday morning quarterback on a bunch of collisions, I think that the way to approach all of this is to have a loop, like a computer loop. The first thing is that the lookout gathers information. He sees what's out there. The next thing to do is to assess, is there a risk of collision with any of these other vessels that we see? 5 of them, there's not. But this one over there and that one over there, there is risk of collision. Then what you do is, if there's a risk of collision, I need to take some sort of action to avoid collision. And what is that action going to be? It may be to maintain my course and speed, Or it may be to maneuver my vessel in a way so that I pass at a safe distance. So this loop should be going on all the time in the back of your mind. I see something, is there risk of collision? No, I don't need to worry about it. See something else over here, is there risk of collision? Yes. So now, what is my action to avoid collision? If I'm a power-driven vessel and it's a crossing situation, then I'm the stand-on vessel for one that I see coming over here. So I'm going to maintain course and speed. But I'm going to watch that person because I expect him to take action to change course or speed so that he passes behind me. If he doesn't do that, then I may have to take further action. Any questions about this loop idea?
Yeah, if you're taking a trip along the Gulf Coast, somewhere in our area, and you see all those shrimp boats out there, they're not gonna get out of your way. They're not gonna be they're not gonna, you better avoid them at all costs.
Moisture boats as well.
Yes,
You're not paying attention to any of those rules you're talking about.
well, that's right. For those of you on Zoom, if you didn't hear the question, this is, if you're going along the Gulf Coast and there's trawlers out there, they are not going to follow the rules. If you're a sailboat, they do not care. And actually, and that is true. And we're going to talk about those kinds of situations, but also a sailboat has to stay out of the way of a vessel that's engaged in trawling or fishing. So you have to do that to stay out of their way, but what you also have to realize is that they could change direction at any time. And it's your obligation, if you're sailing, not under power, to keep out of their way, even if they do change direction. So that is a dangerous sort of situation because they're not paying attention to where they're going. They're paying attention to what they're doing with their nets and that kind of stuff.
Avoid close quarters.
Well, that's it. That's it. And
Well, trawlers have limited steerage, right? So the pecking order, you're supposed to avoid them anyway.
that's Rule 18, responsibility between vessels. When we get to that, we'll look at that and we'll see that trawlers are way at the top of the list to stay clear of. Any other questions? So this is the little drawing I made up about risk of collision stages, I called it. So we haven't talked about the different situations. This would be a crossing situation for a power-driven vessel, crossing situation, overtaking for any vessel. So this was green on the slide. This area out here, there's no risk of collision out here because these people, let's say they're further than 8 miles in this drawing away from me. So I don't have to worry about that. But then once they start getting into here, into this, this is for big ships, it's an 8-mile circle, then risk of collision attaches. So now I have to go through the process of saying, am I the stand-on vessel that maintains course and speed, or am I the giveaway vessel that has to give way, keep out of the way of the stand-on vessel? And what I want to do, the whole objective of this, is to not create a close quarters situation. And I'm going to call 4 miles a close quarters situation for ocean-going ships. Ocean-going ships in the middle of the ocean do not need to pass each other less than 4 miles apart. If you're at sea and you see a big ship out there 4 miles away, it looks really, really close. But so this 4 miles, this yellow circle, is kind of a close quarters situation. And then if you get to this red one, that's 2 miles on this drawing. That's in extremis. That's where the person on the stand-on vessel better be taking some action so that he doesn't get run over. It's the ball's now in his court to take action to avoid collision. He's required to take action. Once you get into this yellow zone, the vessel here probably has the option, and it's up to him to decide, the option to take action to avoid collision other than maintaining course and speed. But once you get into this red zone, it is, he's required to take action to avoid collision. So these ranges, 8 miles, 4 miles, 2 miles, apply for ships out in the ocean. But if you leave this tonight with 3 things in mind, it will significantly reduce your likely to have a collision in my mind. Maintain a lookout at all times, a good, effective lookout. Operate at safe speed, which is safe dependent upon the circumstances. And keep in mind this bubble around you where risk of collision will attach. And then once it does, make sure that you evaluate the situation and take the action that you need to avoid collision. So one of the things that we did in the Navy, because we didn't want to call the captain at 2 a.m. and explain to him what was going on, is before risk of collision really attached, we would a lot of times change course and speed to give that ship out there all the room it needed so that we'd never get within 4 miles of them or 8 miles or whatever. We just, before we were required to maintain course and speed, we just move out of the way. Does the giveaway vessel always do what it's supposed to do? No. Coming into Charleston one morning on the surface on the submarine, I was the navigator on the ship. I was awake because we're going into port. Everyone's up, cleaning up, packing, doing all this kind of stuff. And the people on the bridge are the stand-on vessel for a crossing situation with some ship. They start calling him on the radio and he never answers. And so we had all this computer stuff so that we could shoot torpedoes, and they're looking at it and they're figuring out whether he's going to pass within 0.3 of a mile of us or 0.2 of a mile of us. Without calling me, without calling the captain, they never could get the guy, but they said, we're the stand-on vessel, so we're just going to keep on standing on. Then all of a sudden, the ship rolls over to the side, everything goes flying. They decided, this is way too close, we're bailing out. But it was within a half mile of this guy. And so immediately, I run up the bridge. Well, don't run up the bridge, run up the periscope to look out and see what's going on. And you see this big ship going down the side. So the whole point of this is prevent collisions.
In advance.
Don't,
In advance.
in advance, take early action. Any questions about these ideas? Because this is the most, in my mind, the most important thing about the whole thing. And all of the collision investigations that I've done for real ships, it all went downhill in these things that we talked about. I was surprised at the number of people that had collisions on beautiful days like today, ships out in the ocean that ran into each other. Only 2 vessels at sight. They've seen each other for an hour and they still managed to run into each other. Once you would say, oh, well, it was just a fluke. But I've had that happen 3 or 4 times. There was no one else out there, but they did it because they didn't do the 3 rules that we've talked about.
Skipper, did you already mention how you know who the stand-on vessel is? I
No.
missed that.
No, I didn't.
Because there isn't one.
No, there is. These are the rules that we'll come to. All right. So once you've decided that there is a risk of collision because you've been maintaining a good lookout and you're going at a proper speed, then you have to figure out what is the required action to avoid collision. And that gives us all the rest of these rules right here. And we're going to go through those so that we can see. When risk of collision exists, you have to take the appropriate action to avoid the collision, which may mean maintain course and speed, but the goal is to prevent a close quarter situation and pass at a safe distance, with emphasis on pass at a safe distance. Rule 8 says, this is one of the rules for general action to avoid collision, because we've got general rules about action to avoid collision, but then each of the other rules, the sailing vessel rules, the head-on rule, the crossing and overtaking, have specific things for those types of situations on how to avoid the collision. And that's when we find out who's the giveaway vessel and who's the stand-on vessel. So this is an important thing. Any course or speed change needs to be large enough to be readily detected by the other vessel. So if you are the vessel that's supposed to keep out the way and you change course 5 degrees to starboard to pass behind some vessel, the person on that vessel is not going to think you did anything. Because what helmsman can steer on the lake on a windy day within 5 degrees? The boat's always moving like this, and ships are too. So if you want, not racing rules, if you want to make sure that you are making angle that's big enough to be seen by the other vessel, it should probably be 30 degrees or more. What I used to tell people to do on the ship was, if it was a crossing situation and I have another vessel on the giveaway vessel, the crossing vessel's coming from over there, change course to point directly at the vessel. So they're 6, 7, 8 miles away, but I change course so they're no longer seeing the starboard side of my ship, and at night seeing my green running light. They've seen that I've changed course. They're now seeing that I'm pointed directly at them, and they can see both running lights at night, and so they've known I've made some big change. And if 8 miles away, I'm pointed at a ship that's going that way, there's no way I can run into it, unless it turns around and wants to run over me. So that course change tells the other person without the radio, they see me, they're taking the action that they're required to do, and that guy can go back to sleep or whatever. But if you just go 5 degrees, and let's slow down, if it's a power-driven vessel, half a knot, the person on the other vessel is not going to know you've ever done anything. So, and do I stay on that course where I pointed at the guy 8 miles away? No. As he starts moving over, then I start coming back to the course that I want to be on. But he knows, now he sees at night my red light, not my green light, and knows that I am not going to run into him. And so he maintains course and speed, and I keep out of the way. Stopping a vessel or slowing is one of the most important things you can do. While course changes are the quickest and most effective way to do it, vessels that are going 0 miles an hour do not do a tremendous amount of damage if they run into each other, especially boats like us. At 0 miles an hour, you're not going to do much damage. Big ships, they're just so heavy if they're moving in the waves, even at 0, they're going to bang
Rough each other up.
Yeah, yeah. Now, this goes back to the question of what do you do with trawlers. This is the law of gross tonnage. This is not any part of the rules of the road, but it's a practical consideration. And it's often compatible with the action to avoid collision. It may not be prudent for a small, relatively maneuverable vessel to expect a much larger, unmaneuverable vessel to see the small vessel and take the appropriate action to avoid collision. So if you're in a 14-foot boat, John boat running around at night, you should be wary of a crossing situation where the giveaway vessel is a 900-foot cruise ship or tanker. And so you don't cross in front of that guy saying he's supposed to alter course. You just don't do it. And so this is the law of gross tonnage. Are you legally right? Yes. But you don't want your heirs to be trying to recover money.
They won't even bill you.
Yes.
Legally did, yes.
Yes. And
There you see.
on Chesapeake Bay, as a midshipman, or maybe at that point an ensign, my coach on the sailboat was a Navy captain fighter pilot. And he was like, we were starboard tack going across the bay, and this tanker is coming. He said, no, we're going to maintain our starboard tack, and they need to give way. Well, I started to go below. We kept getting closer, closer, constant bearing decrease in range. I almost went and woke up everyone down below and said, get ready, we're going swimming. But we tacked at the last minute, and we go down the side of the ship, and the guy runs out on the bridge wing,
Yeah,
and he's
certainly.
yelling down at us,
Yeah.
not out at us, down at us. You almost got it. You almost got it. Are you crazy? So that was a very rude awakening to me about the fact that merchant vessels at night are not going to always be able to give way to sailboats in the middle of everything. So this is sometimes the better thing to do, even though this is not what's in the rules of the road to do. But when we talk about risk of collision, when you decide early on that risk of collision exists, then you can take action to avoid collision very early on so that you don't put yourself in this position where the only way your life will survive is if the other guy does what he's supposed to do, and he may not even see you. So keep this in mind. So, now we move on to the action by the giveaway vessel. Every vessel that's directed to keep out of the way of the other vessel must take early and substantial action. So you take the action early, you make it substantial, and you make it big enough in course or speed change so that there's no doubt on the other vessel that you have made the action. And like I said before, we don't have privileged vessels, we don't have burdened vessels. No one's got the right of way. Everyone has an obligation. It's either to keep your course and speed or maneuver to keep out of the way of the vessel that is keeping. The stand-on vessel, this is a rule that is significantly different from the way that it was before. Initially, the stand-on vessel must maintain course and speed. But if the giveaway vessel does not take appropriate action, the stand-on vessel may take action to avoid collision. It's discretionary, but she must avoid turning to port for a vessel on her port if collision can't be avoided by the giveaway vessel's action alone. Then the stand-on vessel must maneuver to avoid collision. So it goes in phases. First of all, if I'm on the stand-on vessel, and this is power-driven, well, it's going to be sail vessels too. I'm supposed to maintain my course and speed under certain circumstances. The other guy's supposed to be the giveaway vessel. I start watching. He's not doing anything. So at some point, I say, this is close enough. I don't want to do this, and I bear away, or do whatever I need to do to avoid collision. But let's say I go a little bit further. At some point, when in my mind, I realize it's getting to the point where the giveaway vessel cannot maneuver his vessel to keep from hitting me, then I'm obligated to take action to do it. And what it says to do is to turn to starboard. Under the rules, almost, if you have a question whether to turn right or turn left, always turn right. Because 90% of the time, that will be the direction to turn. I was a submarine guy, and submarines don't spend a lot of time on the surface. Submarines get involved in a fair amount of surface collisions, and most of the time it was because the guy decided to turn left instead of going right. So don't turn left, turn right, except in some very unusual circumstances. Rule 17 doesn't relieve a giveaway vessel of its duty to keep out of the way. But we're not going to have a collision, so we're not going to worry about this. This would be something to take into account to apportion fault and determine liability for the vessel that didn't take early and substantial action to avoid collision and force the stand-on vessel to do something. Now I'm going back to this drawing again, but to talk about the three circumstances that we have for power-driven vessels. The crossing situation, it's when one vessel, well, let me start it a different way. Head-on situation. That's when two vessels are meeting end to end so that at night you would see both the red and green running lights of the other vessel when you look ahead. You would see their red and green running lights, and they would see your red and green running lights. And that angle is like 5 to 7 degrees coming straight at. Overtaking is a vessel coming up from behind, and at night it would see your white stern light. It wouldn't see the red light, it wouldn't see the green light. So that's 112 degrees after the bow is where it transitions from overtaking to crossing, and the same thing on the port side. So crossing is everything that's not either head-on or overtaking. So when in doubt, you could consider it crossing, but overtaking is pretty obvious to the person who is doing the overtaking. Any questions about those three? When we talk about Rule 12 for sailboats, it's going to be a little bit different, but this is for power-driven vessels, and almost all of you are a power-driven vessel at one time or the other, when you're not completely under sail. If you start the engine and put it in gear, with all your sails up, you could have this spinnaker up, you become a power-driven vessel, and you're governed by the power-driven vessel rules as soon as you engage the propeller. Any questions about the angular relationships for overtaking, crossing, or head-on? All right? And when I was talking about that, I referred to the light sectors. At night, there's the red light on the port side, the green light on the starboard side, and the stern light is white behind. So that's what the overtaking vessel will see. Crossing will see either red or green. Head-on will see red and green. Now, let's talk about sailboats. There's only one rule specifically about sailboats, and it's very similar to what we do racing. If two boats have wind on the different sides, the vessel that has the wind on the port side, port tack, shall keep out of the way of the vessel that has the wind on the starboard tack, just like the racing rule. If two vessels have the wind on the same side, then the windward boat has to keep out of the way of the leeward boat. And the idea with that is that the windward boat, that the leeward boat may be trying to stay off of shoal water or something. It can only come so much in the direction of the wind. So the vessel that's to windward of it has to keep out of the way of the one that's trying to go to windward. If you're on a port tack and you see another vessel to windward, but you can't tell whether it is on starboard or port tack, you then become required to keep out of its way. So it's pretty simple. Different tack, starboard tack boat is the stand-on vessel, port tack boat keeps out of its way. In racing, we'd say starboard tack boat has the right of way, but this isn't racing. Wind on the same side, the windward boat keeps out of the way of the leeward boat. If you're on port tack and you see a boat to windward, but you can't determine which tack it's on, you assume that it's on starboard tack, basically, and you keep out of its way. That's the rule that applies to sailing. Any questions about that? So these are diagrams that show that. That's the opposite tack rule. This is the port tack vessel. It has to keep out of the way of the starboard tack vessel. Here we have vessels on the same tack. This is the windward one, that's the leeward one. The windward one has to keep out of the way of the leeward one. If the leeward boat can't determine which tack the windward boat is on, then it has to keep out of the way. Those aren't racing rules, those are the collision regulations. Now we're going to go to head-on and crossing, and head-on rule only applies to power-driven vessels. It doesn't apply to sailboats. We just saw the sailboat rules. So when power-driven vessels are meeting on nearly reciprocal courses, reciprocal means the opposite side of the compass. So one's headed north, one's headed south, and they're headed at each other. And it's within 1 point, 11¼ degrees off the bow. That's the angular relationship that they can be from being exactly opposite ends. Each vessel must maneuver. There's no stand-on or give-way for head-on. Each vessel has to maneuver, and under the coal regs in the international waters, there's no choice. You always maneuver to starboard. On inland rules, I'm going to say you always maneuver to starboard for coal regs, and you pass port to port. Inland rules, you can go starboard to starboard if you reach an agreement with the other vessel to do it. And so how do you reach
Communication.
communication? The worst way to do it is to pick up your horn and start blowing the horn and think that that guy is going to hear it, and that you'll know which horn signals to do.
Call them away.
Basically, the only smart way to do it is to pick up the radio and call. And so what channel, VHF channel, are we going to call on? 16 or 13. And I was just up on Chesapeake Bay, and 13 was what everybody used. on the bay because it's inland waters. There was really, people monitor 16, but they talk on 13.
Yeah, that's regular Coast Guard, right?
Hmm?
That's Coast Guard, channels, right?
Yes,
For
yeah, the same.
emergency or, communication only, right?
Well, 16 is a distress channel, really, and so you should never spend any amount of time on 16. It's for emergencies, and if you had an emergency like a collision, a man overboard, you'd want to broadcast that thing on 16, but also on 13. But here it seems people, if they're going to monitor a channel, they're monitoring 16 more than 13. If you have a radio that's set up for scanning in multiple ones, you can do 16 or 13, or if you're, like when we're racing, you can put it on 68
Yeah.
and 16. So some radios can allow you to do more than one at a time, and so the ones that you want to use, it's going to depend upon what part of the country that you're working in. Any questions about what the head-on rule is? And so this is another picture. This is what it shows at night. I haven't really talked about the lights, but a power-driven vessel, a large one, is going to have two lights in a line. The forward one is the masthead, well, the masthead and the range light. And so if the thing's pointed straight at you, you're going to see them both in a line. But those of you sitting on the left side, my left side of the room, are going to see spacing between them. Those of you on that side are going to see some spacing between them. But what makes this really good is if I change course, the spacing rapidly changes. And because the white lights are usually much higher than the red and green side lights, and they shine a longer distance at night than the red and green ones, which you'll see predominantly is the white lights for a vessel. And if it's a vessel that's big enough that it is required to have two of them, then you can immediately tell which direction it's going. And if you have radar AIS, then you can back that up. Any questions about the head-on rule? And I'm going to skip over the sound signals because we don't have that much time. I made a mistake on the handout that I sent out that someone caught today and told me about it. For inland, 2 short blasts is I intend to leave you on my starboard side. I had port written in here before. It should be starboard. And the ones that you picked up today in here at Pontchartrain Yacht Club, I made that change. So, next one is crossing for power-driven vessels. Power-driven vessels, and I wrote in here it's analogous to a sailing situation. Like if the wind was coming from here, this would be the starboard tack vessel, and this would be the port tack vessel. The giveaway vessel has the other one on her starboard side. So at night, if I see a vessel and it's not head on, it's one side or the other, I'm going to see whether it has a red or green light. If it's head on, I'm going to see red and green. But if I see one light and it's red, that means it's a crossing situation and I am the giveaway vessel. It's going to be over on that side. That's probably how I see it. It could be over here if it's crossing like that. If I see it on this side and I see the green light on it, then that means I'm the stand-on vessel and it is the giveaway vessel. So it tells you stop or go at night when you see the lights on a vessel for a crossing situation. The giveaway vessel is required to keep out of the way and to avoid passing ahead of the stand-on vessel if the circumstances permit, which is almost all the time. Because what you don't want to do is, oh, I'm the giveaway vessel because I see the green running light of the stand-on vessel over there. It's constant bearing decreasing range. My action should not be, let me speed up and alter course to port a little bit to pass in front. No. Like I said earlier, what I would do would be point at it at a safe distance from it to tell him that I've taken early and substantial action to avoid collision. She recognizes that right away, goes on about the business, and then when they are at a safe distance, and I start coming back to my regular course. And like we talked about before with Rule 17, if the stand-on vessel gets to the point where it thinks that the giveaway vessel isn't doing what it should, it has the option of taking action to avoid collision, which would mean turn to right probably, and is required to do so if it gets to a certain point. And this is what it would look like at night. I'd see the masthead and range lights spread, and I'd see this starboard, the port side light. That's kind of what it would look like. Those are the sound signals. We're not going to do that, but they're in there. Overtaking is sailor power. It doesn't matter. It can be canoes. The vessel that's overtaking another vessel has to keep out of the way of the vessel that's being overtaken. The overtaking vessel is the stand-on vessel, and it's supposed to maintain course and speed. But what if you're in a river and the river bends? You're not required as a stand-on vessel to run into the bank to maintain the heading that you were on when the thing arose. The giveaway vessel has to recognize that you're going to be maneuvering around bends and has to keep out of your way, so that you can follow the curves in the river or whatever, or some channel that you're in. It doesn't have to be a river. The stand-on vessel has to keep out of the way. I mean, the overtaking vessel is the giveaway vessel and has to keep out of the way. And if you have an overtaking situation that starts, the vessel that was overtaking remains the giveaway vessel, the keep out of the way vessel, until the situation is completely done with. Because let's say it moves up over onto the side. Now they could say, well, now I'm a crossing vessel or something like that. No, you're always the overtaking vessel. You always have to keep out of the way of the vessel that you started to pass. Any questions about that? And this is what it looks like at night. You're going to see one stern light if you're the overtaking vessel. There's the sound signals. The only sound signal that I want to talk about is the danger signal, which is 5 rapid blasts on a horn. That is what you would sound if
All else fails.
all else fails. So if I'm the stand-on vessel and it's a point where I am nervous about what the other vessel is doing and need to maneuver, then I should sound 5 blasts on the horn. But what's much more effective is to pick up that radio and call the guy and say very politely, "Are you sure you're complying with the rules?" Yeah, I've never heard that on the river, but there are all kinds of things. Some I can't repeat in here. But the radio is your best friend when it comes to this. As the situation develops, be talking to that person, and it's a giveaway. If you can't get them on the radio and you don't like the way that it is going, take your option as the stand-on vessel and bail out early. Do not let it develop into a close quarter situation with someone who's a giveaway vessel, but you cannot talk to him on the radio.
Ulster Sheldon.
Yeah.
I saw that.
Yeah. Any questions about the danger signal? This is the rule for vessels in restricted visibility. It says, which applies to vessels not inside of each other. Everything that we talked about before, head-on crossing, sailboats, that's all vessels that are inside of each other. If they're not inside of each other because of restricted visibility, fog, rainstorm, sandstorm, any kind of thing that can do it, you must follow Rule 19. You slow your speed down to whatever the safe speed is for the circumstances, and a power-driven vessel has to have her engines ready for immediate maneuver. Most of us, that's not a big deal, but for big ships, that means that they've got to put an engine. Those are direct drive engines on most of the big merchant ships. So that means if you want to go in reverse, you stop it from the ahead direction and you restart it in the astern direction, which can be done in like 30 seconds or so if everyone's ready to do it. So Rule 19, if you detect by radar only by radar, nothing else, you determine whether there's going to be a close quarter situation and whether there's risk of collision, just like you would do for vessels you can see. And if you alter course for this other vessel, you avoid altering course to port for a vessel that's forward of the beam, unless you're overtaking, and altering course toward a vessel abeam on either side. There's a drawing that explains this much better than reading those words. So here you are in the fog, and you hear another vessel out there. Well, you don't hear it, you detect it on radar. This applies when you detect it on radar. So if it's over here, or over here, or over here, and you need to get more room, you turn to starboard. If it's over here, you turn to port. So let's think about what could really be happening. If it was a vessel that's coming in head on, you're supposed to turn to starboard. If it's a crossing situation, the giveaway vessel turns to starboard. If it's a crossing situation and you're supposed to be the stand-on vessel, but now you're altering course, you don't want to turn this way into the vessel that's coming. So you turn to starboard again. Here, if this vessel's overtaking, he's supposed to be turning to starboard. So if you turn to starboard also, then you close the distance to it. So only in this case, for a vessel that's out in this quadrant, would you turn to port if you needed to get more room. But this rarely happens. But now you know that it's here in Rule 19, and there it is. So, any questions? What we've done tonight is gone quickly through the steering and sailing rules, almost all the rules. Well, we have the set of rules, safe speed, risk of collision, and lookout that apply in all conditions of visibility. Then we have all the rules that apply when vessels are in visual sight of each other. And then we have one rule, Rule 19, for vessels that are in restricted visibility. I forgot to put the Rule 18 slide in here, but it's in the Coast Guard rules, and all of this is available online. If you do navigation rules online, you can download this in PDF. You can take out the sections that you want and paste them somewhere. But Rule 18 has the different vessels, so that a power-driven vessel has to keep out of the way of sailing vessels. Sailing vessels have to keep out of the way of, and power-driven vessels, out of fishing vessels, trawling vessels, vessels like minesweepers, dredges, and things that are restricted in their ability to maneuver. And everyone has to keep out of the way of a vessel that's not under command, which is a vessel that either has a steering problem or an engine problem, and they cannot maneuver.
Or nobody's at the helm.
Or nobody's at the helm. So the thing, and the light that it shows at night is white over red, and the way to remember that, white over red, captain is dead. So that means that the vessel can't maneuver. Any questions about anything that we've talked about? You've got the handout here. You know that you're going to get a copy of this, and you put it on your boat and look at it every now and then. And that's all we have.
Great.
Well, let me say something else. Thank you. Our next seminar, Thomas, you and Hooper are going to give us a seminar on weather.
Yeah, I looked over his presentation. I don't know what I'm doing because he looks like he nailed it. He's got everything together. I don't know what I'm doing out there.
Well,
He knows what he's doing.
I'm really looking forward to doing this. It's probably going to be on the 12th of next month, which is long enough after the 4th of July weekend, so that everyone will be back from vacations and things like that. We'll get a notice out as soon as I get it cleared with the yacht club to make sure that we have the room available. After that, we're probably going to take a break on doing seminars. We've done a whole lot of seminars in a short amount of time, and it's summer, people are off doing different things, so we're going to maybe slow down on that a little bit. And we're also thinking about doing some on-the-water type sailing things. Dave Bulliard has volunteered to to give suggestions on sail trim during one of the races that we have coming up.
He
where
can follow me.
He'll follow.
Yeah, he can follow me. I'll be in the back.
So he'll go from boat to boat on different legs of the course and give you ideas like maybe your leach tension's bad, your trim angle is wrong, something like that, you know, that sort of deal. So we're looking forward to that also. And so thanks for coming tonight. And
Who's doing that?
say again.
Who's doing that in class?
It's going to be on the water, and Dave Bolliard.
We haven't scheduled it yet.
We haven't scheduled it, and he's a sailmaker if you don't know him.
Do we have any dates on the next cruise? Is that?
Well, that's a good question. I sent out an email after the last cruise and didn't get any real responses about where people
Interest.
wanted to go. And the two best candidates are either going to Slidell because it's so convenient, or going to the South Shore and anchoring or tying up in the yacht harbor. The downside to going to the yacht harbor is that it's like $1.50 a foot a day. I forget what the price is. If we
Plus,
go-
there's no place to walk to eat.
There's no close place to walk to eat, but we may be able to work a deal. Either we do another cookout in the park right there, or maybe New Orleans Yacht Club would cook burgers or something like that.
Or so.
Or Southern. Another alternative would be to go to Slidell. The Tammany Yacht Club is there, and they've got a long pier that could accommodate everybody. The only downside to that is there's no shore power at all on that pier. So in July or August, it may be really, really hot to spend the night on your boat. So for those of you that are here and those of you listening by Zoom, my thought would be to just wait until the weather starts to cool off to do the next one. But if anyone wants to do one during in July or August, let me know, because you know, depending upon where it goes, we'll see what's happening.
We do have a question from the chat. Any good advice for a sailing vessel crossing a big channel like at Mobile or Tampa with lots of ships crossing, coming up fast from behind while your vessel's going 5 knots?
Yeah.
Any advice for that situation?
Way.
Yeah, my advice to that would be to make good use of the radio on channel 16. And so you're crossing the highway basically when you're doing that. And what I would do if I had to do it would be to pick my time, and I'd want to go close astern of some vessel that was going out. But keep in mind that there's going to be a whole bunch of turbulence in the water behind that big ship. So if I was in a 15-foot boat, I'd want to let it get out of the way. But in a 30-foot sailboat, I'd go close behind that ship because that would give me the most time maybe between the next one. But I want to make sure that there's not someone who's going to whack me on the other side. And this is the time to talk to those folks on the VHF radio so that they know they are not going to be surprised by what you do. The worst thing that can happen is for one of those ships to be completely confused by what your plans are when it's so easy to call them. Now you say, well, this is a foreign flag ship that's coming. Under international law, the bridge watch standards and engine watch standards are required to conduct everything in English. So you should be able to talk in English to any ship coming in. And as we've talked about, if there's trawlers there, whatever vessel that you're likely to be in, unless it's a vessel that can't maneuver at all, you have to keep out of the way of the trawlers, and you have to expect that the trawlers may change course erratically. So that's maybe a long answer to that question, but that person who asked the question is recognizing that there's risk of collision there and that they need to proceed with care. Any other questions?
A suggestion was made to have a raft up, maybe instead of a full cruise, particularly for like the July and August.
I haven't done any raft ups on Lake Pontchartrain. I've done a bunch of them on Chesapeake Bay, and when we did those, we rafted up in some cove or place where there is protected water, if you do it overnight. I guess you could raft up out here in the day, but you know that you start to get chopped, and if you got boats tied up to each other, then you gotta make sure your masts aren't getting tangled up and all kinds of stuff. So raft ups can be lots of fun, but it has to be the right sort of place. But if anyone has suggestions for that or has done them, let's get some ideas out there, because we could do that. And if you're rafted up somewhere out in the water, if there's a breeze blowing at night, it will keep you cool if you don't have an air conditioner to run. Any other questions or ideas? All right, well, thanks, everybody,
Yeah, very good.
for
Thank you,
attending. And thank you. Send us ideas that you have, or things that you might want to hear about in a future
Or that you
seminar.
want to present.
Or that you want to present, by all means. If you are, know about a topic, we'd love to have you come discuss it with us. So thank you.